So thank you. I'm from CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Security is so important. We have it twice in our name. We are the nation's civilian cybersecurity agency, and our mission is to defend today and secure tomorrow. And obviously, open source is a large part of that. I work very closely with our open source team, although I should also be very clear that I do not lead it. CISA, as we heard, sort of is focused on a little more of the outward-facing side of the cybersecurity mission for open source security. And we recently issued a security roadmap with 4 key points. First is establishing our role in securing OSS as sort of the main voice in government trying to sort of capture and coordinate. Now, we, of course, work very closely with our partners across the US government, including our friends at DHS, the people who've been pioneering things at CMS, and yes, even the scary people over in DoD and the intelligence community. But we also work closely with our friends around the world. One of my colleagues just did a tabletop exercise working with some open source foundations doing security exercises, saying how do we respond? And also sometimes remember it's time to get out of the way. So we go over to Europe, but we'll make sure that we let the European open source community lead, and we just support. We work on identifying open source usage. I'll talk about that in a moment. We're focused on addressing risks inside the federal government. CISA has the lead responsibility for keeping the federal government, civilian government, secure. And part of that is building on things like DHS's excellent work with OSPOs. And then the last piece is looking across the open source ecosystem to see what we can do to secure it and harden it. So 3 quick projects to touch on. First is just figuring out how much open source do we use and where is it? And this is one of these embarrassing gaps. There's some great work that's come out of Frank Nagel's shop up at Harvard Business School, but that data is really driven by modern applications. We in the government are concerned about defending your government systems and critical infrastructure. And those were not part of that study in any great fashion. So we said, we need to understand what open source is used in the federal government and what open source is being used in critical infrastructure, operational technology, the things that keeps the lights on, the water clean. That's a really hard challenge because that means going deep into the supply chain and often finding out where's all the open source that's being used in the proprietary and, to be honest, wildly outdated software that keeps things running. We want to make sure that we can trust the open source that we use as we start to pull this in. And so we have 2 projects that are related. One is the 4P framework that we're working with some friends at CMU on that says, hey, based on the project, the product, what protection is available and what policies apply? How do we understand whether and how it is okay to use this open source? Context matters. So we can't just create blanket rules. We need to create a framework that allows people to do that with themselves. And guess what? Because, well, I used to be an engineer. I really can't claim to be one anymore, but if you're going to talk about something, you should build something. And so we're trying to build some tooling that can take that framework and build it into our approach. And then the last piece is pushing out guidance. Now, guidance from the federal government sometimes has a great weight, and sometimes it's just, oh, look, they said a thing. Now, so the challenge is to say, how do we frame this? And so we frame some of our cybersecurity guidance as saying, don't do this. Sometimes it's a lot easier to say, don't do this dumb thing, than it is to say, do this virtuous thing that we don't know what we'll actually do. And so, say, hey, listen, don't use open source that we know has exploited or exploitable vulnerabilities. Please, can we at least get on that same page? And how do we get that far? Well, have an SBOM, we'll talk more about that later. And use scanning tools, be careful with your selection, use a local cache and local repository, things that all engineers need to know. So, we're very happy to talk more about open source security. Here's how to get in touch with us, and we look forward to the conversation today.